I know that we can.
I know darn well we can work it out. Oh, yes, we can. I know we can. Yes, we can. Oh, why can't we if we want to? Yes, we can.
I know we can make it work.
Welcome to Yes We Can with Pastor Sherman D.Manning. I want to say thank you for all of you who have tuned in. I've gotten your emails. I get your text messages. I get all of your comments. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Listen, I want to take you back to a crime scene that I was at a short while ago. I call it a crime scene because I think it is a crime, it is a sin and a shame that in this great country called the United States of America, we allow people to live like this on the streets. I have a fascinating guest today. You don't want to miss him. I tell you, he is an awesome person with some great ideas, and you've never met anyone like this gentleman who will be coming in a moment. But right now, I want you to take a look at us feeding the hungry in a crime scene on Skid Row. Take a look.
How you doing? That's the Bunny Rabbit Smith Street.
I don't want to.
Yes, we can. Can you say yes, we can?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Yes, we can.
Can you sing? Can you sing?
What?
Can you sing?
Yes.
Can you sing? God bless America. Can't get in front of them. Can you sing? Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm looking for singers, man. Can you sing? If you can't sing, you gotta go to the back of the line. How you doing, man?
Thank you, man.
Good to see you. How you doing? Good.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. If you would like to be a part of helping us house these people and feed these people, there's information on the screen. You can help us. You can help us today. My guest for today is Mr. Paul Webster. Mr. Webster is the founder and executive director of Hope Street Coalition, which is an advocacy organization changing public policy that leads to the devastation which we see on our streets every day. He's also the executive director of the LA Alliance for Human Rights. Had a lot to do with the lawsuit that was filed on behalf of the homeless in Los Angeles. You all met my guest, Attorney Elizabeth Mitchell, who actually filed that lawsuit. He's executive director of that organization, the LA Alliance for Human Rights. Mr. Webster, before we talk about these organizations, before we talk about Hope Street, LA Alliance, and all of that, just do me a favor and tell me who you are.
Well, first of all, thank you, Pastor Manning, for allowing me to be on your podcast. I really support people like you and yourself. I just kind of tell people that it's great to meet like-minded servants who are out on Skid Row working to solve and transform lives. So I very much appreciate and respect your work. Who am I? I'm a policy and legislative guy. I'm one of those guys that you see behind the elected officials, giving them little ideas and telling them different points to make. So I worked in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. for a number of years. I've worked at the state level. I worked for a California state assemblyman and later senator. I worked for the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce as their vice president of public policy. But it wasn't until I worked for a local homelessness assistance program in my hometown of Vista, California, down here in San Diego County, that I really started diving deep into the homelessness policies and what's happening at the federal level and the state level and a lot of times the local level.
Now, before we get there, take me back, if you will, to House of Representatives. What did you do there? What was your job?
I pretty much did everything. I started off as a legislative assistant. I worked on education reform. I worked on defense issues. I did a lot of work on various social issues, such as adoption and foster care reform. I did a lot of work. I had an opportunity to work for a member from Florida, and I even got involved into reform of natural disaster insurance policy, which is kind of an arcane kind of a thing. But did a lot of work with credit unions and banks, did a lot of work on housing policy. And ultimately, I even worked for a member at one point in time where we did some work on agricultural policy. So I've done a whole lot of different things when I was in the House of Representatives, but mostly it was all legislative. I went from legislative assistant to legislative director to I was a caucus director for something called the Family Caucus that used to exist. It doesn't exist anymore. And then I also was the chief of staff for a member of Congress and worked I worked for a member who was an appropriator, and those members of Congress are the folks who essentially write the checks for the programs that go out to the various parts of the country, and everything from education programs to defense programs to health and human services, all those kinds of things. So spent about 12 years in the House of Representatives doing a lot of just policy management, legislative management, writing amendments to things. So, a lot of really high-level nerdy stuff.
Now, Mr. Webster,
but I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, you've done an incredible job of telling me what you do. And we're here today. This whole show is going to be dedicated to what you do and perhaps how maybe some organizations such as yours and ours can collaborate together. But I want to take a step back a moment. Rather than find out just what you do, you still haven't told me who you are. Where did you grow up? Who is Paul Webster? I know what you do. You're a policy guy. You're very good at what you do. You're an incredible human being. I've met you. But I want to know, for my listening audience and people who've never met you before, who is Paul Webster?
I'm a guy from San Diego. My dad was in the Navy all of his life, so we moved a lot. I think I moved every single year as a kid until I was in junior high. So between Northern Virginia and San Diego, Long Beach, San Pedro, you name it, moved a lot as a kid. So I grew up in the Navy. I'm a Navy brat. I think some significant things in my life is that I became a born-again Christian when I was in high school, and that really impacted what I wanted to do with my life and how I saw and treated people. I saw in my life that even as a young man, I really didn't have a lot of answers, and I didn't treat people very well. And I like to think that over the years of following Jesus, that I've done a better job of that, and I've learned how to do that a lot better. And I really saw my service to be in this kind of, I don't know, intellectual kind of policy-oriented way to contribute and make the lives of people better. I'm deeply pro-life. I care much about individuals. Over the last probably 6 or 7 years, 10 years perhaps, I've really gotten to know people who have been came up very different backgrounds than myself. Very, very privileged, very much a product of suburbia, Southern California, surfing and playing in the ocean all my life. But I really, in the last 10 plus years, I've really understood some of the heartbreak and some of the devastation of, for example, people who family members struggle with chronic drug addiction and what that looks like. People who struggle with family members, sons and daughters who have serious mental illness and a lot of the challenges that they go through. So I like to think that I'm relatively sensitive on those areas, and I like to think that I can use some of the knowledge and some of the networking and some of the experience that I've had in my life to affect change and to change the larger systems that we see around us, so that fewer people are being harmed and fewer families are being harmed by the devastation of addiction, the devastation of mental illness and poverty, and so many of the challenges that I was fortunate enough to escape growing up, but I know that so many people struggle with on a daily basis. I do want to say one thing.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So when I graduated college from Long Beach State in 1984, I took a job as a commission-only sales rep in Los Angeles, and my territory was Vernon, Watts, Bell, Compton, parts of South Central Los Angeles, southern downtown LA. They used to call it the Warehouse District, kind of right below the Santa Monica Freeway, near Alameda in that area. But I tell you what, I used to cold call in all of those areas.
And what were you selling?
I sold one of the very first desktop computer systems. So I don't know if you remember back in the day, they would have these floppy disk drives that were like 4 inches. They were these little squares, and you stuck it in and turned the little door, and the computers would work that way. And so I was out there. I was selling floppy drives. I was selling printers, printer ribbons, computers.
Now, let me ask you, are you telling me that people in Watts could afford these?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There were a lot of, I had customers who were architects,
Aha.
who were attorneys.
Wow.
I had a customer who was a woman in Watts who was a transcriber, and she worked out of her home, and she had a small home, bars on the windows, and I would pull up to her neighborhood and sell her printer ribbons and things like that.
And what neighborhood was that?
Word processor going. Sorry?
What neighborhood was that? What neighborhood?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it was near Slauson and Central. I'll tell you that.
Okay. Over near where my church used to be.
Exactly.
Now take me back a moment. And this is not really a political show, but it is for discussion and food for thought. Iron sharpening iron. You said earlier that you are pro-life. What did you mean by that? Unpack that for me.
Well, what I mean by that is I believe that the image of God is put upon every human being, and therefore we need to have significant respect and significant humility as we address the issues that impact people's lives.
Such as what kind of issues?
I think that's not just limited to the issue of abortion. I think it includes issues of the death penalty. Reverend, I know you've been involved in issues of unjust incarceration. I think those are really significantly important issues, because ultimately what happens is when we see how power is used and how people are impacted by power, and we do that in a haphazard and an irresponsible way, what we are really doing is we're altering people's lives and stories in ways that often can't be reversed. And that is a humbling issue. That is an issue that really we need to take great pause in how we exercise that power. So when I describe myself as pro-life, what I really mean is I hold a very, very high regard and very, very high respect for how we treat other human beings and the way that we respect the fingerprint of God on each and every human being.
Okay, so suffice it to say you don't support abortion.
Well, I don't. And here's why. So there's a lot of ways that people can determine that issue. I don't personally. I would like to see a different kind of a society where everybody, infants, people at the end of their lives, people who need restitution, people who need transformation. I would like to see a society where all of those people are welcomed and accepted and are provided the assistance that they need. We don't live in that society right now.
I agree. I agree. And quite frankly, abortion, I was talking with some pastors the other day, and I was indicating to them that, of course, as a pastor, I don't support abortion. I don't want my daughter to have an abortion. I wouldn't want my wife to have an abortion. I just don't like abortion. But I also don't believe that I, as a man, have a right to tell a woman what she's going to do with her body. And in these instances where 10-year-old girl has been molested and impregnated, I just don't think I should have a law. I mean, I don't think you can legislate morality, and I didn't come to argue, but sometimes intellectual debate can be good because it can be enlightening for both sides. And I think the other problem I've always had with some, not all, Paul, but some of the people who are pro-life is that some of them are against abortion in every instance, and they say that they love the right of this child, and this child has a right to live and a right to life and all of that. However, they turn around and don't support the programs that would help that child once that child comes into the world. So I just think that that's something that I think that people like you and me ought to talk about, that kind of thing, and enlighten each other. Go ahead.
And I think in my view, I recognize that we don't live in that society that embraces and supports everybody. But when I say I'm pro-life, I want to do the best I can to create that society.
Yes, I'm with you.
Does that mean that I'm gonna get in people's faces and tell them that they're wrong because they're opposed to a piece of legislation that I might support? No.
Right.
But does it mean that, kind of like what you're saying, we can have conversation about this, we can have differences of opinion, and that we can love and respect each other within our differences of opinion? I believe that's
absolutely, Paul. Let's you and I go to D.C. and teach our legislators, especially since you used to work there. Let's teach them what Rodney King tried to say before he died. Can't we all get along? I mean, I can vehemently disagree with someone politically and then turn around and go to dinner with them. That is the kind of Christianity I try to practice. Now,
that's exactly right.
Take me to our main subject for today. You were about to get there earlier, but I wanted you to sort of set the stage for me. I want to know how and what made you get involved with homelessness.
Yeah.
Music to my ears. Talk to me.
So this is kind of interesting. I've not really met anybody in my journey over the past 20 some odd years who said, you know what, I have a vision of me being a leader on homelessness. Mostly what I've seen is people who say, I got dragged into this and I got called into this, and I saw the tragedy going on in the streets and I wanted to help. And that's true for me. I had a great job. I was the vice president of public policy for the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, dealing with everything from zoning to education reform and business development and all these kinds of things. And what happens in organizations like this, every once in a while, there's kind of a regime change. And that happened to me. So my boss got fired and everybody he hired got fired. And I was left without a job. And I was kind of, this is a strange thing for me. I'm going to have to find a way to make a living. So a friend of mine said, there's an organization in your neighborhood, Paul, that is really focused on helping transform people's lives. And so I got to know the CEO of that organization, and he liked me. And what was happening is that he was struggling because he had a number of housing units, and he would bring people into his program. He would help support their sobriety. He would give them workforce training. He would support them in the parenting of their kids. This was an organization that was focused solely on families and families who were homeless. So a lot of times parents would come into this program with their kids who were still in protective services. And so they would devise programs and help these families and these usually single mothers to overcome addiction, get work training, get their GEDs, do what they needed to do in order to get reunified with their kids, and then begin paying rent and get into housing and, grow and become self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And they were running into some problems because a lot of the programs and a lot of the funding that was supporting this organization, particularly with respect to homelessness, was starting to change. Mm-hmm. So there were some really interesting policy developments. For example, they were saying, look, you can't drug test your clients. Mm-hmm. You can't require them to do workforce training. In fact, you can't require them to participate in any kind of class or any kind of service requirement. You basically just have to be a landlord, and if there's something that they need, well, you can offer it to them, and it's really up to them if they want to accept it. So,
now, if I may, what was the name of this organization, Mr. Webster?
It's a really good organization. It's called Solutions for Change, mm-hmm. and it's in Vista, California.
Okay.
And they've really had some challenges that they've had to overcome, mm-hmm. particularly as the federal government and the state of California have changed the way that we address homelessness. And mm-hmm. and I would say, and I kind of use one of these slogans. I said, the issue isn't poverty, the issue is policy. Mm-hmm. So what's happening from the federal government is that they are requiring a certain set mm-hmm. of alternatives and certain things that you can do and certain things that you can't do to receive federal funding to assist homeless individuals. And that has really changed the way that local organizations, mm-hmm. Regions, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, the state of California address homelessness. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I don't think I mentioned earlier, but I worked for a year in 2020 as the senior policy advisor for the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C. Uh-huh. And I looked at the data, and we've spent more money as a country on homelessness than ever before. We've funded the creation of more shelter beds, more rapid rehousing units, more permanent supportive housing units than ever before. And yet we have a significant amount, we've seen an uptick, an increase in homelessness, particularly in unsheltered homelessness.
Absolutely.
And that's particularly going on in the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the data and you look at the policies and you see the kind of challenges and the kind of difficulties that local communities have in trying to stay within the bounds of this government funding, mm-hmm. it makes it very difficult to reduce the number of people who are living on the streets. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot behind that. The state of California, I think they have a lot of challenges, and their policies have made it easy. They made it easy to get drug addicted. They made it easy to live with mental illness without being treated, and the consequences of that. They've let out people from prisons that have had nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. So I'm not suggesting that it's the federal government, it's that policy, but it's public policy in general, in my view, that has exacerbated and made worse our homelessness crisis.
And so public policy, so you think the problem or the main problem is public policy, and what? Is there any malfeasance? Is there a waste of money? I mean, overall, what do you think the problem is?
I think there's definitely better ways to spend the money. I'll tell you a good example. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of organizations, community-based organizations, that would do things and that they called transitional housing. Mm-hmm. So let's just say that Yes We Can Ministries purchases a 20-unit apartment building, mm-hmm. and you say, look, I would love to use this 20-unit apartment building to help people who are not housed, to get them the training that they need so that they can work and they can afford their own rent. Great, go ahead and do that. And you'll say, look, I know that there's a lot of people out there that need this, but I only have 20 units. So I'm going to do the best I can for these 20 people in these 20 units and get them to self-sufficiency. And hopefully they'll move out and then I'll be able to serve 20 more people, right?
Right.
That's called transitional housing because you are building into people and you're helping them get the skills that they need so that they can move on, and then you can start serving 20 more people. Well, what the federal government did in 2013 is they changed the priorities. So they disincentivized programs that relied on transitional housing, and instead what they did was they pressured those programs to change their units into what's called permanent supportive housing. And permanent supportive housing means that if you're the landlord and you've got these 20 units, you basically are no longer a quote unquote service provider that's helping people get self-sufficient and move on. You're there just to accept 20 people and you will just support them living there for as long as it takes, as long as they want to live there. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. That's a strategy that is effective in a lot of ways. I think one of my biggest arguments is that when you put the heavy thumb of the government on one way and you discourage the other ways, that creates problems. Because you're basically saying we are only going to fund and we're only going to prioritize this one kind of housing because we in Washington, D.C. know best, and this is how it's going to work. Well, we've done that for the past 12 some odd years, and we've seen tremendous increases in the cost of developing permanent supportive housing. We've seen tremendous delays in the creation of permanent supportive housing, and we've seen some people get off the streets in permanent supportive housing, but the devastation and the destruction that occurs between when people are on the streets and when they can get into this type of housing really begs the question of, can't we do other things as well? And that's one of the reasons that the LA Alliance sued the city and the county to say we need to have a both-and approach. We need to not only continue to support the development of permanent supportive housing, but we also need to create shelters. We need to do more transitional housing.
Let's press pause. Let's press pause right there, Mr. Webster, because I want to get to that lawsuit in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching a great man, a Christian, child of God, an executive director of an organization that addresses the ills and the sickness of homelessness that faces us every day in this country, and especially here in what I call the homeless capital of the world, which is Los Angeles. His name is Paul Webster. You should Google his organization. He's the founder and executive director of Hope Street Coalition. It has been awesome just conversing with him. He has pretty much diagnosed the problem. In this first show, I'm going to have him join me very, very soon for part 2, and we're going to talk about that big lawsuit that was filed by his organization through Elizabeth Mitchell's firm when we come back. Remember, you can make a difference in your community. We can do it together. Yes, we can.